Just a quick context on SPC for you, Harry, and folks in the audience. If you're joining a friend of the community, SPC is a collective of technologists, tinkerers, and entrepreneurs who come together to learn and freely explore new ideas. Members do all sorts of different things. They start companies, they work on open source projects, they study new domains, and pursue research, amongst many other endeavors. So far, SPC has had about 400 members. They've collectively started over 120 companies, 30 open source projects, and over 30 kind of papers, books, and other articles penned by different members of the community. So as kind of one of the core tenets of the community, we try to learn from folks who are the best and the brightest in their fields. And that's why we're very fortunate to be joined by Harry Stebbings today. As many of you know, Harry is the founder of the 20-Minute VC, the world's largest independent venture capital podcast with over 100,000 listeners. He's hosted hundreds of leading venture capitalists from the likes of Sequoia, Excel, Kleiner Perkins, Benchmark, and many others. More recently, he's also started hosting a host of very successful kind of founders and functional domain experts who are at the top of their field. I know many people here listen to the podcast, but if you don't, I'm a big listener and I would highly recommend it. My personal favorites are Doug Leone from Sequoia. Just re-listened to that one yesterday. It's amazing. Covers everything on leadership and life. Another great one is with SPC alum Avichal Garg, the founder of Electric Capital. And then, of course, I have to mention our very own founder, Ruchi Sangvi, was on just a few months ago. So yeah, excited to have Harry here. I know, Harry, like you've mastered the art of interviewing, so I will try to turn the tables on you. I guess to kick it off, how does it feel to be on the other side of an interview for once?
I would be more nervous if I was you. I'm an incredibly judging person. And so if the questions aren't stellar, then I'm going to absolutely ransack you. But yeah, no, I'm excited. It's nice to have the tables turned.
Awesome. Well, I will start off with a question that I just stole from you. So if this one fails, it's kind of right back on you. But you always start your episodes asking this one question. It's very broad, which is just tell us your origin story. So I'll ask that to you. Tell us your origin story. How did you come to start the 20-Minute VC?
Yeah, I mean, I can go back, till when I was 9, because it wasn't actually that long ago. My father was a broker, a commodities broker, and he was actually terrible. And so he used to bring home his work at the weekend, and I used to look for anomalies in largely kind of gas and oil pricing. And I fell in love with macro markets. I started trading. Obviously under his account. I was too young to have my own account. And I made a decent amount of money for a 9-year-old. And so I bought a Mac, fell in love with product design. I don't know if you guys remember the basketball game on the old Macs, which was like absolutely spellbinding to me. So I fell in love with product design. So I had this two loves of macro and of product design. And then I was sitting in London where venture capital did not really exist at the time. And I saw The Social Network in the cinema. And I thought, oh my God, there's this thing called venture capital, because there's a scene with Peter Thiel where he invests in Facebook through his hedge fund, Clarion Capital. And I was like, fuck, I can do both things together. This is the dream. And so I went home. I read every blog that I could do for about 3 or 4 years on venture capital. Brad Feld, Roger Ehrenberg, Mark Suster, the early writers. There weren't many at the time. And then when I was 18, I was very, very unhealthily obese. And I used to walk to school every day. And I basically realized that no one was interviewing VCs on podcasts. And I used to listen every day on my way to school as a way to lose weight. And I was like, well, I really want to hear them speak and I want to learn from them. So I'm going to interview them. And and then hopefully one of them will give me a job. And so I started from literally my bedroom with my mum downstairs. I had $50 and I didn't know any VCs. And I started cold emailing, and I cold emailed Guy Kawasaki first. I read his books. If we want to talk about the art of a cold email, it's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And so that was the start. And now, it's quite a large media organization, many millions in revenue, probably about 300 million AUM across different funds. So it worked well so far. Fingers crossed.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like a lot of founders that we talk to, have kind of similar origin stories. Like they start with a lot of hustle and persistence in the early days, and then just kind of start to grow beyond their wildest dreams.
Man, I used to create when I started. I used to create Twitter accounts and I'd tweet like famous VCs, be like, "Oh, Harry's amazing. You should hire him." When I was like 18, like the hustle and the gumption to do that. I'm looking at it now. I'm like, oh my God. But yeah, so there we go.
That's amazing. Yeah, a little bit of growth hacking there. I guess I'm curious. So, you're an entrepreneur yourself. You've started this media business and now multiple funds. How has kind of being a founder yourself influenced the perspective that you have when working with entrepreneurs that, you're now backing out of your funds?
I just have so much empathy. It's the empathy. No, I'm kidding. I hate that answer. This answer that you have empathy because you've been a founder, I think it's the opposite. I have less empathy. I have less empathy because I've been there. I've fucking done it. And you know what? I don't like excuses. Oh, I don't know term sheets. Well, learn them. I didn't know an LPA for a fund. I was 21. It was 100 million. I learned it. So that probably wasn't the answer you were expecting. I have a lot less patience for things when people don't put in the time or effort. If you don't know, say that's fine. But if you don't put in the hours and you don't put in the effort, I really don't have the patience. And I see this with a lot of founders I work with. Say, a lot of founders who are my LPs, these are billion dollar founders. We have like $25 billion founders. They're all billionaires. I bring them into rounds. They are harder than VCs 10 times over on founders. They take zero shit because they're like, I don't care. I run a company. I know how it's done. Like, if you're not meeting this, you're not going to make it. And, I always say I want to back founders who are like much better than me. Because if we look at my business, it's like, $5 million plus business, but it's not like a huge business. And so I kind of use it as a yardstick, but I'd say it gives me a lot. I have higher expectations. I don't take much shit. I'm very sensitive of my time. I find the majority of calls don't take. Like, so much can be done on email. I really don't take many calls unless it's like a real relationship builder. And so, yeah, I would say that that's kind of the biggest thing, actually. Yeah, we can go into many different parts, but yeah.
Interesting. Well, thank you for taking time to do the call with us. We're fortunate to get on the schedule. It's interesting. Like, so you talked about, that ability to kind of learn and some of the things that you learned early on, and the fact that you kind of admire that in founders. I think another, trait that you show that's really important for a lot of founders is like this storytelling ability, this ability to articulate their vision, convince customers, hires, investors to kind of get on board with it. And I mean, in your job, you literally have a front row to the best storytellers in the world. You interview them, multiple times a week, and you're obviously a fantastic one yourself. So I'm curious, like, what are the commonalities of like the great storytellers, in your opinion, that you've kind of met and interviewed over the years?
I think quite a worrying trend that we've seen is that venture capitalists today are better storytellers than founders. It should be the other way around. But yes, totally. I think the core thing is actually resonance. It's you have to bring the consumer into your world. And the way you do that is by creating familiarity. It's by adding detail. And what I mean by that is an example. I was 18 when I started my podcast from a bedroom. One. Or option two, I remember I lived at home. My mother was downstairs in the kitchen. I was so nervous going up to my bedroom to record that first interview. I pulled the home phone sockets out so no one would interrupt the show. You're bringing the listener in. The detail creates familiarity. It makes people follow your journey. And I think people don't like really bring people in. The other thing with storytelling and kind of product marketing and brand marketing, you have to make people feel something. Go to any SaaS website, 99% of them are so bland. When are you ever like, yeah, I'm pumped for this? Never. And like, it could be, payroll. Payroll sucks. Like, we should feel about payroll. I know it sounds bad. Compliance management, it sucks. Why don't we make people feel again? And the way I think you make people feel is by having a stance. And, I think the best brands make you for or against. They have an opinion. And I just don't think enough products today actually have opinions that make people resonate and be for or against them. And so I think kind of both those things, creating familiarity, creating armies or factions that make people either align or not, are really core to storytelling today. And I think the other thing is, like, just as a leader as well, when it comes to storytelling, you're going to get so bored of it. Just for anyone building companies, or just managing teams, but you have to do it with as much gusto, as much excitement every single time, because for someone in that team, it's probably the first time that they've heard it, and they have to take that excitement home to their children, to their wife, husband, you name it. And that needs to be imbued to them too. And so it's really, really important that every single time you bring the best salesperson to tell the story.
That's fascinating. You talked about like making your brand stand for something, feeling familiar, and I would kind of agree with your take that a lot of SaaS websites feel very bland today. You did a great job of doing that for your own brand, 20-minute VC. Like, how did you think about that in the early days? Like, how did you think about, setting the vision for like what that might look like, and then, figuring out, how do we even, kind of like build this audience and like build this, I don't know, community behind the brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one is, like, I think a lot of people think that I started media and then I like fell into venture. I always wanted to be an investor, and I saw this as my mechanism to get in. I always say brand is a hack to track. And what I mean by that is, if you want to start investing and you want people to give you money, well, they need your track record. Well, as an 18-year-old with no money, good luck getting a track record. And so brand is a hack or a shortcut to the track record. It takes time to establish a track record, and it takes money. So I think brand is a hack track. And I saw the media company and the media side as a way to hack it bluntly or shortcut it. And then in terms of how I thought about like the media company, honestly, for me, venture is about three things. It's about discovery, it's about picking, and it's about helping. And I saw the media company as a unique asset that would help me find the best founders. Fundamentally, as an investor, the only thing that matters is, can you get to the front of funnel for distribution for the best founders in the world? And if you can do that continuously and reliably, you will be able to raise money from perpetuity, and your returns will be stellar. I believe that the media company would allow me that chance to be at the front of funnel. And then picking. Honestly, you know what? VCs are not the best people to pick companies. This generic group of people sitting around this partnership table. I mean, let's just get this straight. If they're a generalist, they do consumer, they do fintech, they do AI, they do healthcare, they do SaaS, both PLG, enterprise. I mean, my word, what an incredibly intelligent group of people. I mean, fabulous. I wish I had that IQ, but I don't. And my job is to build a community around me that leverages each other's knowledge to make the best investment decisions. We have some very sophisticated ways of doing that in the back end, which no one knows or sees. I always tell people we're building the next generation of Andreessen with 100th of the headcount and 100th of the cost. I just don't reveal how. But that, I fundamentally believe that actually it's a community approach to investment decision making as well that is optimized. And then on the helping side, especially as you scale, what becomes more important? Brand, customer acquisition, customer retention, all of which I think the media company and storytelling is very central to. And so for me, it's very much like Fred Wilson does with his blog. It's a tool that I use to make me a better investor. And I think that's really important. Sorry, Finn, you're probably just going, Harry, you just keep talking. But like the other thing is, like, so many funds are created. I invest in some funds now, and I get loads of people. Everyone's got a fund. I was with someone the other day, and I mean, they do a bizarre job. They should not have a fund, but they do. But the reason is, like, you have to have a reason to exist. And like being another spin out or another there, it's not a reason to exist. And I think, we were very fortunate with amazing investors that we have with us. The reason I think we were successful fundraising, it's very different. You can touch the media company. I show investors in our funds the communities, the tools we've built for the community decision making. It's very different. It's a company you're investing in as well as a fund. And so, I always go back, if anyone's thinking about starting funds, really understand why you exist and make that truly differentiated, because there's so many I'm spinning out and now I want to invest. That's a really hard place to be.
Interesting. Um, Yeah, I mean, like you kind of like started, I guess, as a student of venture capital, like you're learning from the best in the business, and then kind of became one yourself. When I think of, like venture, like you said, all these, investors have different styles, right? Some might be more, market driven or data driven, or like SVC, a bit more kind of like mission driven. I guess I'm curious, like as you were thinking about, building that brand and transitioning it from the media business into, now, a series of venture funds, how did you think about kind of developing that, your own style of investing? I'm just curious, like what that process was like to go from being, a student of venture capital into, one yourself, and coming up with your own style.
First off, I'm normally really friendly and charming, so this sounds like I've had a bad day and I'm just unleashing everything on Finn, which is relatively the case. It's been a long day; it's almost dark outside, but I'm going to unleash this on you. And so, yeah, how did I find my own style? I think fundamentally, interviewing and investing are very, very similar, which is why some of the best investors are journalists. You have 3 to 5 minutes before an interview where you have to create an environment of safety. You have to make the other person feel that they can tell you anything in a non-judgmental environment. I've just lost my head of sales, my funding round collapsed, whatever that is on the show. It's exactly the same when you're investing in founders. You have 3 to 5 minutes at the beginning of that meeting where you really have to make them feel safe, where you have to give a bit of yourself, share something that you're worried about, to make them feel like this is an exchange and actually a true conversation. And there you get to the truth much more quickly together. And I think that's like a really core element to it for me in terms of how I see kind of combining the both. In terms of like how I think about investing, I mean, especially when you're early stage investing, there's a couple of things that are just like hilarious. Like market sizing. Like, good luck. Like, it's just ridiculous. If you think you can predict the size of markets and market growth or market contraction, I mean, bravo. But you can't, especially given how markets change so quickly over time. So I spend honestly very little time in terms of like actual market sizing. One thing I don't do is starting a company and running a company is really, really hard. I've learned the hard way, honestly, that investing, especially in emerging markets, it adds a new dimension of complexity. It adds often currency risk. It adds political risk. It can add geographic risk in terms of weather. It can add all of these different risks, which just make running a company so much fundamentally harder. And it's an externality that can kill your business. And it honestly was a big lesson for me that something outside of yours or the founder's control can kill the business. As an investor, that's not a risk that you want to take. In terms of products change all the time. Yeah, early stage, don't spend any time on products. I really just spend a lot of time, honestly. It's that I'm not doing I focus only on the founder and like how I think about the market as being interesting over time, but I don't do market sizing. And then on the founder specific, everyone says founder. Well, how do you analyze founders then? I always ask founders, we're all a function of our histories. Yeah. What are you running from and what are you running towards? It's the best way to get to someone in terms of really understanding their motivation. And that's why it's important that you have those like 3 to 5 minutes at the beginning, which are kind of opening people up and revealing more of themselves and yourself in terms of like vulnerabilities. I always ask that. And you tell a lot about that. I'll give my example. My family lost everything when I was very young. And I saw my family go from relatively comfortable to wondering where the fuck we're going to sleep that night. Seeing your family lose all security is immensely powerful as a driver. I will never, ever let my family be in that position again. And that is unwavering. Like, why do you want to invest in me? Because I'm an absolute machine around remembering that and making sure that that never, ever happens again. That's quite powerful when you hear a founder regale a story similar to that, or where I have one where they started their first business as a 14-year-old to pay for their parents' cancer treatment, which was not possible, in the country they were in. that is truly like, you just tell so much about someone from that. So I love that question. I always ask about relationships to money and risk. I think both are very indicative of someone. I always ask about fears. What are you truly fearful of? And that often that comes out with a lot. And also really push. People will often not tell you, and you have to go, that's interesting. Mine's actually, I had bulimia when I was younger, and I'll say, oh, yeah, mine's actually gaining weight. And they'll be like, oh, wow, okay, yeah. And suddenly you've reframed to them where their emotional barriers could be in this conversation, and you just get a lot more out of it. And at the end of the day, that's it. You're only investing in someone. And so that's how I try and go deeper.
That's fantastic. I guess I have a question. Like you've mentioned a bunch of these things, like building intimacy, storytelling, kind of keeping up this pace of learning. Do you think that and I'm kind of curious, like you have a bunch of founders in the room, people who are thinking about starting their own businesses. Do you think that these characteristics are innate, or do you think you can learn them and be coached on them? How do you think about working with the founders that you back, on, these things that are really crucial for founders? Or maybe you just don't back them if they don't have them, but I'm kind of curious, like, how do you think about building that skill over time?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely 90% of things can be learned. And also, that's to say, I don't want, like, if you haven't had hardship in your life, that's great. Like, it sounds like I only back incredibly broken people from everything I've just said. Not at all. Like, there are some people who just had relatively normal lives, and that's absolutely fine. But then it's more a case of what are you running towards? And that's often kind of a bigger part of it. So you kind of see people segment between running from or running towards. In terms of for founders developing them, I think the only thing that matters really is like hustle and effort. I think hustle and effort make up for a lot of sins on what you don't know. And so I think for me, that's really what I look for and what I say. Going back to it, I think the other thing is like just try and be different in any way. I don't know if you know Seth Godin, but Seth Godin talks about the purple cow. The purple cow is a marketing technique where being different is better. And it's often, I have this kind of theory now that actually large accelerators are a net negative for your chances of fundraising, not a net positive. Because investors just see this sea of companies, and it's like the paradox of choice, where you're like, oh my God, there's too much. But actually, if that Google product manager or incredible young programmer came to them outside of the batch, it would be much more interesting, but they're lost in this sea of companies. And so I think being different is more and more important than ever. I think honestly, having the hustle, I think being a storyteller, everyone's like, oh, don't agree with the storyteller side. But actually, like, the truth is you need to sell three people, which is customers, it's employees, and it's investors. And storytelling is key to that. So I think, honestly, storytelling, like the hustle, and kind of the emotional awareness around the weaknesses, well, not weaknesses, but kind of who you actually are, is really important. I'm having a lot of thoughts right now also on like age of founders. Obviously I'm quite young, so that this is an interesting thought, and I'm just like spitballing here. But like, I actually am finding that I quite like older founders, because when times are really tough, younger founders struggle a lot. If it's first time, if it's new, they really struggle and they don't quite know how to control emotions. And then in the really good times, they buy the hype and they bluntly believe it. I find with more mature founders, there's just a constant temperament throughout that, I've been doing this for 10 years. I don't even look young anymore. I used to make a joke about looking young, but like, yeah, little things do not faze me. I mean, not much phases me now, not because I'm confident, or it's just because I've kind of seen a lot. And so I'm kind of leaning towards actually a slant towards older founders, which is kind of interesting, I find. Yeah. Does that, I don't know if that answers at all.
No, that does. And that's really interesting. Because like I feel like, would it be okay if we got a little bit more personal with a couple of questions here?
Yeah, you can ask me anything.
Because you kind of like mentioned some things like, I don't know, like I don't know, insecurities or things that people would ask you like in your early days of starting this? You're a lot younger than a lot of your peers. I think like one thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is like we are kind of entering, a downturn here, and for me, for you, for a lot of founders even in the room, like this might be kind of the first like serious downturn that we've seen during our careers, because the last one was 14 plus years ago. So I guess I'm kind of curious, like how do you think about like preparing yourself for this environment and kind of just managing your own psychology through it? Because like a lot of your career has been up and to the right, and then turbulent times hit, and we have to figure out what the heck we're doing here. So I guess I'm just curious, how have you gone about that in this current environment?
Yeah, it's that's a very funny question. I lost money earlier this year, and the TechCrunch wrote an article about it, and no one picked it up. And then someone on Twitter did like some meme about it and did the 20-minute diligence, which it wasn't 20 minutes of diligence, I hasten to add, but it was relatively entertaining and it went viral. And that was tough. That was a really hard moment, actually. So like, how do you prepare yourselves for these times? Number one, a surprise is always the worst thing. If you're running a company today, tell your investors the worst news. We are in deep trouble in this way. Like, surprise is the worst. All updates. We did an analysis of the portfolio today of 38 companies we have. 14 do updates. 14. Okay? 8 do monthly. 8 out of 38 do monthly updates. I'm still going, I am annoyed. Like, and those 8 are the best companies. They're the most disciplined founders. This is another thing you said about earlier, like what makes great founders and like what founders can do. You know what? Inspiration, motivation, wonderful. They sell books, but I tell you what, you don't have them all the time. And on Sunday night after a long week, you're often not inspired. I'm not always inspired. I love what I do. I'm not always, but I'm disciplined as fuck. Every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, I do 12-hour shows. It's like a swimmer. You're always in the pool. You always say no to your friend's birthday because you're training in the pool. Same thing with founders. And the investor updates are a really good way to show that, I think. And like, I very much see that today. What was your question again? Sorry, I rambled.
I was asking about how you manage, your psychology through a downturn, like how you prepare yourself, given that it's kind of the first one we've, maybe seen during our career.
Yeah, rule number 1, expectation set with the people around you, no surprises. Rule number 2, you will face incredibly hard decisions. Often the right decision is the hardest in the short term and the most painful. Make that decision. It's also often not as bad as you think it will be. You're never wrong. I always think this one, you're never wrong to do the right thing. And actually, it's very hard to argue with the right thing. And so I always think back to that. And then I also always think back to the simple one, which is this too shall pass. You know what? Everything is fleeting. I was in hospital this weekend, actually, for something. And, I was around people who were really not well in accident emergency. And you know what? The perspective of seeing someone, I don't know, who probably will not survive very long, gives you a lot of perspective. The head of sales leaving will pass. Your company even dying, I hate to say it, there will be more. Life goes on. It sucks and it's horrible, but this too shall pass. And I think also just patience. Like, honestly, this is just a game of who can survive the longest. Content is, startups are, and investing is especially. Like, it's not a short term. This was never meant to be a get rich quick scheme. And being here for the long term is what makes winners. And just remembering that. And so I kind of always think to those as my core tenets.
Super interesting. You mentioned this TechCrunch article earlier this year, and I think I probably read that article and saw that meme, and
I think everyone saw that fucking meme.
And yeah, I mean, it kind of blew up, and I guess one of the things that I've been reflecting on a little bit more recently is there are a lot of companies doing this kind of building in public type motion, and you really embody this, right? You have literally built yourself in the public eye, you have, through your podcast and now through your funds. And so like you kind of open yourself. I mean, there are a bunch of pros and cons, but you definitely open yourself up to criticism. That's one of the cons. And I guess I'm kind of curious, like, how do you think about the trade-offs of like building in public as you see other founders doing it? And I guess I'm even curious, like, what you would advise folks, on the call here today to how they should think about that.
It is absolutely brutal. The amount of abuse you will get if you build in public is, and it works, which you kind of hope and dream it does, and then it does, you will get insane amounts of abuse. And it really hurt me. Like, it would make me very depressed and sad, actually. And then I went to a friend and they said, quit whining. This is your choice. You chose this. And if you can't face the music when you stick your head up above the turret, then don't. But this is the life you chose. And sadly, this is what comes with it. The rough and the smooth. You can't have it all. And honestly, when I get it now, I ask myself, would I rather be quiet and behind the scenes and not have all the benefits? No. Well, then I have to bluntly accept that this is part of it, sadly, but this is part of it. And I have to, not embrace it, but accept that that is the way. And now, actually, it doesn't really impact me very much, and so not in an arrogant way, but like it's just part of it. And as long as I believe in what I'm doing, it's okay. I'm also very lucky, and I think mentors is an important one. I've been through some really hard times in like the 10 years. Personal wise, mum's got MS and kind of everything in between, and then work's been tough sometimes too. I have great mentors. Make sure you have people around you, and for different things. I have a personal board of mentors. One's for fund, one's for fund mechanics, one's for portfolio management, one's for family. And so for the different things, I have one specific person. And I just feel that in those really tough times, going back to your question also on managing through tough times, having a personal board just makes you feel so much more supported. And not only that, I've acted phenomenally differently for the better because of the advice that they have. And so I would really advocate as much as possible for building that personal board as soon as possible.
What are the, I was actually going to ask you this question a little bit later about kind of mentorship, and you kind of touched on it here. I'm curious, like, how did you build those relationships, and kind of like what has been the most valuable advice that you've gotten from these mentors? And I guess they probably are in different areas, like you mentioned, one's on maybe the fun side, one's on the personal side.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I think when you find someone amazing, ask them a simple question of who are the one or two people who you most respect and admire. And if you've hopefully done what you should have done in that meeting, which is impress or inspire them, I also always ask the question, how do I want this person to feel when they leave this meeting? If it's a founder, I want them to be fucking excited to work with me. I want to turn this turns into a whiteboard. I want to do a whiteboarding brand journey of how we're going to change the brand, create a lifestyle brand, create a content roadmap. I want you to leave like, we have to work with this guy. How do you want the person to feel when they leave? And then once you know that, I want to know who are the one or two people that you respect and admire. And they'll say, oh, I really respect, Finn and Ruchi. And then you say, fantastic. You know what? I've heard so many good things about Finn and Ruchi. Would it be possible to be introduced? Once people commit to a name, you've got the intro. It's like, that's the lesson. When they say, let me have a think, you don't have it. It's dead in the water. Sadly. Just let that one be. But when they commit to a name, you have the intro. And so I then say, listen, I would love to meet them. And then you kind of do that with 10 to 15 people. And if you're good, they will want to be working with you. And so that's how I did it. And it works really well. I always think, like, how do you create flywheels in your business? And that's a flywheel to do mentorship. I have flywheels in the podcast, which is, how we got so many guests on at the beginning who were tough to get on. Finn, who would you say we should have on the show? Great, fantastic. If you're raising a fund, and you're looking for LPs, when an LP commits to your fund, it's amazing. People are like, great, this LP committed to my fund. No, that LP is now a champion for your fund. They are incentivized to bring in more great people. Say, Finn, thrilled that you're going to invest in my fund. Who would you say would be great for my fund? 3 names. As an investor, you will say them now, and like create flywheels in your business. You can do it with funding rounds as well. So I always look to do that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm probably giving like the most random answers to your very specific questions.
No, I'm enjoying it, and I hope the audience is too. I see a bunch of people chiming in on the chat and giving great feedback.
I love it. Can someone share a link? God, I can't live this fucker down.
Can I ask one last question before we turn it over to the audience? And I guess this is like continuing on a slightly more personal side. I think one of the things that's always struck me about your career is like you started, in this industry from a very young age. You kind of had this meteoric rise. It was very fast. It was very visible. Earlier on, before everyone joined, you were talking about how you kind of work, these crazy hours and are up till all hours of the night. One of the things that like founders struggle with is kind of just like managing the balance of personal and professional, and avoiding burnout. And I'm kind of curious, like how have you, been able to kind of, strike the right balance and figure out kind of just how to manage like the personal and professional, given how quickly things have moved and how publicly.
Well, I think that this is where I get in trouble. I think that sadly, in some ways, it is slightly more of a young person's game, especially on the like builder side. I love children, but it's phenomenally harder with children. That said, it also creates motivations that younger people don't have. You have to make it work. There's been a lot of studies around when entrepreneurs have babies, how it actually makes them much more motivated. But the idea, honestly, of work-life balance, for me, I just find very challenging. Like most of the time in the early days, it is about brute forcing it. Every single person that followed me on Twitter in the early days, for up to 50,000 followers, got a personalized message from me, and I did it personalized with their name and then a comment on where their location was. I wanted to build a brand ambassador out of every single Twitter follower, because I'll go and tell someone else about it. And if 1 in 10 tells 2 people, we're going to grow pretty fast. And so a lot in the early days is about brute force. I don't honestly really believe in work-life balance, especially in the early days. But I also don't believe that it doesn't get easier over time. Anyone who says that company building doesn't get easier over time is actually lying from a work-life balance perspective, I have to say. When you have accountants, lawyers, EAs, it does get easier. I'm sorry, you're not reading through term sheets going, what does this mean? What does that mean? I'm going to book my travel. No, you can have a little bit more life. Do I have more life now? Yes, I have a brilliant EA. I have a wonderful CFO. I have a great COO. It allows me a lot more free time. That said, I spend my free time on new ideas, so I don't exactly, but like it does get easier. So it's not all like bad, 1. And then 2, like I just like, you should love what you're doing. And so it's not like work. Like I don't really often view it as work. I mean, sometimes it is. The weekends are work. Weekends, I do 2 12-hour days in the studio where it's literally listening to my voice, which I find challenging. So I'm thrilled that someone enjoys it. But I have 2 metrics for the show. One is time to, if you're creating content, these are both really important. Time to value ratio, the amount of time it takes to get to a nugget of wisdom. I mean, I'm sure we all listen to podcasts and 10 minutes in, we're going, oh my God, he's still talking about his days at Stanford. For anyone at Stanford, I'm truly sorry. It's great, but like 10 minutes into a podcast, I wanted some good, fantastic nuggets of wisdom. And then 2 is word to value ratio. Like, oh, that's a great question, fluff. No, take it out. Number 1, number 2, number 3. It's really important that like every sentence has value. And so on the weekend, I spend an immense amount of time doing that myself, even though we have editing teams. That's really important. You can never lose the pride in your product. Like I'm immensely proud of the product that we put out, and you can never lose that as a product owner. And as a CEO, you're always the product owner, even with a head of product or whatever. You are the product owner always. And so, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
No, it does, and we all benefit from that commitment that you show to the product that is the 20-minute VC. So. Thank you for that. And I think there's even a message in chat here from Piyush that says he can confirm that you DM'd him after he followed you back in 2018. So,
There you go. Yeah, I used to spend every night from 12 to 1 a.m. I used to block it out and I used to do DMs. There you go.
Amazing. On all of your podcasts, which is wrap up with a quick fire round. This is like one of my favorite aspects of every episode that you host. So I'm going to ask you kind of a short question or say a quick statement, and you're going to give me your immediate thoughts, like 60 seconds or less. All right.
Terrifying. Let's do it.
Cool. First one. Do you have a favorite aphorism or saying?
I said it. What's got you here will not get you there. I think about a lot. You know, for a long time I sold, oh, I was a child in a bedroom with no contacts and no money. Great, it got me to where I am. But actually, you know, we're going to be the next generation of Andreessen. We want to build the next generation of BlackRock, the next great financial institution at the intersection of venture and media. That's not related to my past. Leave the chapter behind. You need to start a new chapter. So what's got me here won't get me there. And then the other one that I do just love is you're never wrong to do the right thing. Any tough decision, ask yourself that. You probably know the right thing.
Got it. I know there were some votes in the chat for cheetah in the hair that you said earlier. I don't know what that means, but I was going to vote for that one. All right. Moving on. Second quick fire question. What's the most memorable 20 VC podcast that you've had? Hard to pick favorites, but
No, it was with Bill Gurley from Benchmark and Howard Marks, who's like one of my investing idols. I used to read his memos when I was like, you know, at boarding school under like flashlight after lights out. And I asked Howard Marks the question, and he said, that's a bloody stupid question. And like, he's a hero of mine. I've never like felt so small. And then Bill Gurley is like, no, I'll answer it. Don't worry, Harry. It was a good question, really. And it was a very funny but interesting moment in my investing career for sure.
Got it. What's been the most challenging element of building 20 VC, either the podcast or the fund?
It is your whole life. I mean, it's literally your whole life. I'm very lucky. I've made, you know, a great media company, and I've made more money than I thought I would. But you really do sacrifice everything. And the question that I have is like, you know, will I look back on my 20s to 30 and I haven't had a weekend off since I started, literally, not even a holiday. Like, I don't think I will regret it. I love what I do, but the sacrifice is very real if you want to play it hard.
Is there a moment when you knew that you had product market fit?
Yeah. I quit university. I was a law student for a month, terrible law student. I fell asleep in my first seminar or lecture or whatever it's called. But no, it was. I had Ariel Zuckerberg on the show, and we got 100,000 plays in a day. And then I got offered $5,000, which at the time was like double what I had in my whole bank from the sponsor. And I was like, great, I'm out. Peace out. I'm done. The fact that I thought that was like enough to just live life forever is relatively amusing. But that was product market fit, 100,000 in a day.
Amazing. Okay, last question. I know you are a bit of a mojito connoisseur. So what is the best place for mojito in London?
It's a very good question. It's called the Churchill, and it has a beautiful terrace. And it's my favorite because it taught me the most important lesson on life. My grandfather worked there for 40 years as the hotel manager. And I used to sit in the corner of the hotel with my train set, and he would sit there with businessmen and he would, you know, do business with them. And he taught me from around 4 or 5. He always said to me, Harry, it's not what you say, it's not what you do, it's how you make people feel. And when people come into my hotel, they must always feel at home and they must feel safe. And I think about that every single day. And to a question here about Kieran coming to the fund and what I've learned, it's about making people feel safe. Then they do their best work. I think the concept of lifetime employment is really interesting. It's a like far end point of that, which is that people always have a job with you. And if they do, they will always do their best work. But I love that statement. And that's where the best mojitos are as well.
That is a fantastic place to end. Harry, we really, really appreciate you joining us for an hour. We know you've got episodes to get to, and
I have one favor to ask of you.
Sure.
In part of the growing media company and time commitments,
Yeah.
I'm hiring a chief of staff. It is not an easy one from a sourcing perspective. If anyone has recommendations or suggestions of friends, I'd love to hear. It's a pretty cool position. You hang out with the most famous founders and VCs in the world. The budget's pretty uncapped. So let me know. I'm Harry at 20vc.com. I would love any suggestions.
We will send them your way. I really appreciate you coming by. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't think we can really do claps over Zoom, but everyone just drop a message in the chat and thank you, Harry, for joining us. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed it.